All right. Well, I know two of you, and just reintroduced myself to Quilla. I am going to share right away, just because. Let me see. I think my slides will cover this. There we go. How does that look?
Good.
Okay, great. So, who on earth am I? So, I am relevantly a bell ringer, and I've taught beginners on and off. We were just talking about one of our beginners in Seattle. I learnt to ring in Oxford when I was 10. As some of you may have run across my father, John Pusey, who's still ringing in Oxford and is a great advert for ringing as a recipe for longevity. Ringing was a big part of my teens and student years, as was English country dance, and I'm still ringing in Seattle, so come and visit us. Dancing. I'm also a dancer, a caller, and a teacher of English and Scottish country dance. After dancing for several years, I trained formally as a Scottish country dance teacher. The Royal Scottish Country Dance Society takes qualification quite seriously, so this involved two 5-day training courses a few years apart. The angles are less dogmatic, so I'm learning to call and teach English country dancing as I go along, mainly at workshops and from various mentors. So credit where credit's due. This is my summation of little bits that I gained from other people's work. At a formative moment in my Scottish dance teaching trajectory, I took a workshop from Bruce Hamilton, who lives in Palo Alto. And the things he said and the things we worked on in the workshop stayed with me. He, in turn, was influenced by Marshall Rosenberg's work on nonviolent communication. I myself am not all that familiar with that area and certainly not an expert. More recently, Brooke Friendly has condensed some of Bruce's ideas on feedback for use in a dance workshop context. I revisit Bruce's notes periodically and pass them on to newer callers whenever I can. And although the majority of the content is specific to the dance world, I think some concepts are much more broadly applicable, and that's what I want to share with you. I've grouped them under two headings: leadership and the contract, and giving and receiving feedback. Tom and I had a conversation about this at Mission BC last year. And that's why I'm here today. So what do dancing and ringing have in common? A lot of things, as it turns out. You can't meaningfully do them on your own, although the pandemic did force us to get creative. There are skills involved, both physical and mental, and they have to be learned and taught. There's an aesthetic reward, whether you consider ringing to be music or not. I'm not getting into that gnarly topic. There's also an intellectual satisfaction of putting puzzle pieces together. Most relevantly to the rest of the presentation, with very few exceptions, we all do it for fun. Certainly no one is getting paid big bucks. So, who's in charge? As a new teacher and caller, I was ping-ponging between hubris and ego on the one hand, the sort of let me try, how hard can it be, and imposter syndrome on the other. Any minute now, they're going to realize I have no clue what I'm doing. I think this is true for a lot of us, whether we put ourselves forward or got volunteered for a job. Bruce reframed this in a way I found useful in terms of the usually implicit contract between the group and the person in charge. First off, do we actually need somebody in charge? And in some sense, no. We can take a deliberative, democratic approach to deciding what to do next. And honestly, if there's only 5 of us at practice night, that may be perfectly fine. Usually it's inefficient, and we'll get more of what we want done if someone is keeping things moving along. And this is, as Bruce put it, government by consent of the governed. Such a realization that up to a point anyone will do serves to deflate some egos while reassuring the timid on the other hand. Although a beginner would struggle, A tower captain, for example, does not have to be the best ringer or conductor, because nobody minds if they call on the expertise of others, provided that they can do so efficiently and still deliver what we want. Okay, so you find yourself in charge of an event or a band or whatever. Now what? Once you understand that your job is to make decisions, don't hang about, go ahead and make them. But having established that being a leader is easy, we have to acknowledge that being a good leader is hard. So take a step back and ask, what do people actually want? Why do they come ringing, and why do they keep coming? Answers are going to include some combination of friendship and community, intellectual stimulation, exercise, church service, tradition, and of course, going down the pub. It's worth finding out what each person values, either by asking them explicitly or just getting to know them. You start with, as it were, a bank balance. Almost always the band wants you to succeed, and most people are grateful that you're the one in the hot seat, not them. Every time you deliver something that they want, you earn more credit, and every time something goes off the rails, it costs you. Note that this is credit that you can choose to spend. Maybe there's something they don't think they want, but you do. And although you've thought long and hard about it, you're still not sure how well it will work. It's okay to be upfront and ask them to extend you a little patience, provided that you're willing to own your failures and get things speedily back onto safe ground again. It's true that many techniques of leadership are learnable, and you can develop a checklist of best practices by watching others or figuring it out the hard way. But whether we like it or not, the group takes on some of the traits of the leader. So if you're welcoming to new people, they probably will be. Conversely, if you're brusque and businesslike or chatty, if you laugh, preferably at your own mistakes, but laugh when anything goes wrong, then that's generally how the group will be. And if you're keen to learn, then that's something that they will probably learn from you. And finally, thoughts, words, and deeds are a three-legged stool. None of them is enough by itself. You need to, in thinking terms, you need to figure out what you think matters. You need to say that out loud, repeatedly, usually, and then you need to do things that show you mean it. If you think of your group as being thoughtful, adventurous, friendly, resilient, and you treat them that way, chances are that they'll rise to that and be all of that and more. So moving on to giving and receiving feedback. Why bother with feedback? So for many people who come ringing, many people in general, getting better is a goal. It's not for everybody, but it is for a lot of people. And even if people are self-motivated, they may not actually be sure how to improve. And feedback can help us assess where we're actually at, what's going well and what's not going so well, think about where to go next, and then to actually figure out how to get there. We still have to do the work and make choices, but others can help us along the way. So many of us, perhaps all, have opinions on how other people do things, whether that's running a practice, teaching a learner, ringing a heavy bell, or learning a method. When we give feedback, all of us, I trust, are trying to be helpful, but there's a fair chance no one's made you sit down and think about how to give good feedback. So what are some of the characteristics of good feedback? It's useful. Is it something they already know? Does it matter to anyone but you? And if you got this feedback, what would you do with it? Audible, by which I mean you give it in a way and at a time when someone can actually hear it. if you tell someone that their conducting skills are terrible and they should learn to keep track of coursing order right after a service touch justify it out, you are probably going to be met with resentment and defensiveness. If they're tired and stressed for any reason, they may brush you off. Even if you're right, it will do neither of you any good. We fondly imagine that our feedback is so relevant and thoughtful that the recipient will immediately say, of course, how right you are, I'll start doing that right away. In fact, unless there's a pressing safety concern, the best feedback comes without strings. The gift is having the chance to mull that feedback over and perhaps one day use it to modify our outlook or actions, not necessarily in the way that was hoped for by either the person who gave or received the feedback. So some techniques for giving that feedback in such a way that it's useful and audible and has no strings attached. Talk about things you observed, noticed, and experienced. Be specific and concrete. Avoid judgments and conclusions and suggestions unless that's specifically what someone is asking for. And I have some examples next, but let's just pause on that to think about it. Very often when we give feedback, it comes freighted with some emotion and a good deal of judgment and conclusion. So here are some examples. They're rather small, so I will read them out. And these are things I just came up with off the top of my head. I'm sure you can come up with plenty of examples of your own. So you said stand at backstroke, and I wasn't sure whether to stand immediately, so I rang another hold. So I'm not making any comment about it being the fault of the person who said that, or they should have said it as such and such a way. I'm just saying, this is what happened, this is what I did. Or, you told Sam to pull harder, and I saw them move their hands up the rope. Again, right at that point, you're leaving it up to the person you've given the feedback to decide what that means, what to do about it. So for example, not something like, you weren't loud enough, you need to pitch your voice higher, but perhaps you could say, I couldn't hear you when I was on the far side of the room from you, or I couldn't hear you when other people were talking. Again, they can figure out what to do with that. This one is slightly relevant to a situation I find myself in. You shouldn't call it zigzags, they should be learning standard terminology. How about something like, when Joe came to visit and told Chris to dodge 3-4 up, I saw Chris looking really confused. Again, they can figure out why that confusion might have arisen and what to do about it. Don't even simply say, that was awesome. I mean, you can, and that's fine. We all like to be told that. But if you say something like, you said 3 words during that touch, and the bells who had swapped over swapped back, and they both grinned. So you've got a lot more information in that second statement. Maybe the thing that the person who's hearing it thought was awesome was not what you were telling them about, and they'd completely forgotten that this was something that happened, and you're drawing attention to what matters to you. So if you're serious about improving at whatever it is you're interested in, and you know that your own observations aren't currently enough, you may want to ask for some feedback. Good feedback, as you might be starting to get the idea, requires attention, analysis, and clear articulation. And this takes effort and practice. So when you're asking for feedback, respect your donors. Ask someone ahead of time. You can choose whoever you like. Try to ask different people to spread the load around. Oh, and if you ask someone, they may just sort of say, no, not today, that's fine. as you spread the load, remember that a great ringer may not necessarily give you the best feedback. Be as specific as you can about what you want feedback on. So think about what you're working on. If you ask generically for just anything they notice, they may spend all of their effort on something that's not valuable to you. So yeah, again, respect your donor's time. When you get the feedback, this is really where the magic kicks in. And I quip that the technique described is impossibly simple and also simply impossible to do at first. So listen, ask clarifying questions if you're not sure what the person giving the feedback has said. Say thank you, and that's it. Don't explain why you did the thing you did or why the thing you did was so much better than what they're suggesting. Just take it away and think about it. Why is this so powerful? Often when we listen, we're so busy drafting our response that even if we're not defensive, we aren't paying full attention to what's being said. Knowing ahead of time that you aren't going to make a response other than to say thank you really frees you up to listen to what's being said to you. But it's hard. If you're like me, you will really want to respond. But I encourage you to try it more than once, and just notice how it changes your interactions. So in the real world, you can't always expect the feedback you get to be good quality, and you have a few options. If your group is small, you could explain the process to everybody and have everyone practice. Even if that's not feasible, you could partner up with someone else who you know is really trying to improve at something, and you can both practice giving and receiving feedback. Especially if you're in a leadership role, you could try that process out in public if you feel you can model it well and people see what you're doing. And again, if they think it works, they may try it themselves. It's going to happen sooner or later. Someone's going to come up and tell you stuff, perhaps in a somewhat challenging way. So remember that people usually have the welfare of the group in mind. They spend their precious time on this hobby, and so they care. If you get a lot of less useful feedback from a particular individual, consider what's animating them. Can you give them some other outlet for their energies, or can you give them insight into all the balls you're juggling? Why the thing you're doing is perhaps harder than they realize. You can try the same technique, just saying thank you. If someone's looking for a kind of back and forth, this can be enough to close the conversation down if it's disruptive. With just 2 syllables, you've simultaneously listened to them, appreciated their desire to give input, and not got into an argument. If you need to say more, you could say something like, I'm not in a good place for feedback right now, thanks, or just, got it, thanks. If you want to give feedback, think about the best time and place for it. For example, not right after a meltdown. Try asking whether they would like feedback, and if so, when. Be ready to take on the burden of remembering what that feedback was and the context around it until later. And perhaps later it won't seem all that pressing anyway. You can decide. Just a few final thoughts. One of the things that this kind of technique can help with is giving control back to the receiver of the feedback. Sometimes if you're in a busy situation with lots of people giving you feedback all the time, that can be a little overwhelming, especially for somebody who's not experienced in that position. it isn't a panacea for everything. It's not going to work equally well in all situations. It doesn't replace active teaching. So if somebody's really trying to learn something, then just, giving them neutral observational feedback and letting them figure it out for themselves isn't enough. You do still need to teach them. There are more experienced people who can actively teach, but then you sort of both need to know you're in that relationship. And similarly, if what you're looking for is not sort of neutral feedback, you're actually saying, I have this specific problem, I'm trying to do X. Have you got any brilliant ideas for how to do X? Then that's fine. That does not intersect with this. I think the place where I see most use for this is in a situation where, for some definition of peer, you're in an environment of peers. So whether that's, you may all have different strengths and weaknesses, but nonetheless, like no one of you is necessarily clearly the expert, and the person on the receiving end is clearly the learner. So that's what I have, and I'll stop sharing at this point, because I think probably the most useful thing is, if you've got any questions about this, to dive in and ask them. As I say, there's some probably both very familiar ideas in there and some slightly alien concepts as well.
So how long did it take you to feel comfortable doing this type of thing? Or are you comfortable doing this type of thing?
I still have to work at it. And it's interesting, we are going through a process at the moment in one of my dance communities, where there are some of us who are broadly at the same stage, trying to get better at doing something, and we have just started getting together in groups and being vulnerable enough to try stuff that we're not necessarily good at yet. And it takes work not just to jump in and sort of say, do it this way. But for me, it's a really useful exercise when I'm giving the feedback to sort of stop and sort of, I'm about to tell them it would have been better if you'd done X. And it makes me stop and think, well, what did I actually see that makes me say that? Sometimes, it's years and years of experience, and that's okay. But just to sort of say, you said turn away from your neighbor and nobody knew which direction to face, or it highlights the thing that is most relevant, rather than me bringing my assumptions about what was difficult for other people to the situation. So I find it useful when I'm giving that feedback, and I think it's longer term, it's going to be very important for the group that they don't feel like anyone is bossing anybody else around. I really find it easier to listen to that feedback as well when it's given to me in that way. And I kind of go, I'm able to just sort of go, okay, I wonder why that word that I thought was perfectly chosen didn't work. But someone's given me some hard evidence of what actually happened, and so maybe I should rethink. Work in progress is the short answer to your question. Laura, I don't think you've heard my spiel before. Are you? Do you have any questions? If not, this is fine.
Oh, no, I think I'm going to use right away the just saying thank you. So you have time to process it, not just, I hope I'm not defensive, but I'm sure in my head, I'm like, oh, what was I doing? But yeah, just knowing in advance that you're just going to say thank you. And then that's really helpful, because I have, as Tom knows, I have like several dozen teachers, including your dad, including Tom, pretty cool.
Yeah. And the thing is that you aren't promising that you're going to take on board what someone said. you aren't promising that it's going to change what you do in any of the ways that they want you to change. Yeah, because sometimes people do definitely, they come at you and they're like, I wish you do X instead of Y. And then, you can respond to that by saying, so what happened that made you say that? Or, sort of what did you see? I was watching so-and-so, but were you watching so-and-so over here? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll use that right away. It's good. Instead of saying, but Tom says, or in my head, so what Tom said this and Quill said this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not actually your responsibility to defend everything you've done right in that moment.
No, that's super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Quilla, did any of that resonate or raise questions for you?
No,
No is an acceptable answer.
I'm not sure. Let's see. Yeah, some things resonate. I think sometimes we pussyfoot around too much, however, and this can lead sometimes so some of what you said made me feel like that. So I am not always direct, but I guess I would like to be clear, and I'm not sure why I'm feeling this, because I don't associate with ringing, but I have this sense of, okay, could you please just get to the point, was part of my reaction, and I'm not sure, it's sort of, because in society so much we're trying, well, actually, I think I do know, at school, there's a whole lot, this is high school, middle school, of, being careful and considerate and concerned, and that's good, except sometimes it gets too much, I think. So I guess I was starting to feel a little prickle of that.
Yeah.
Probably less from what you were suggesting or the example specifically than from my experience of listening to other things that, other presentations.
Yeah. I think having this presented to me, having a chance to practice it, thinking about it over the years, as much as anything else, it just helped me kind of rethink my own attitude to, particularly, this in a dance situation, there's quite often there's a lot going on. I mean, it's very much like running a practice. If it's a busy practice, you're juggling a lot of things simultaneously, and and very often you do want to sort of bound up to the person who's in charge and say X, Y, and Z, and some of it's positive and some of it's suggestions, and they just can't necessarily deal with it at that time. And it made me think more about how to give that, like what the point of the feedback was. If it's just to make me feel better, or it's to give them some information that they didn't have before.
Right.
And so that's definitely part of it for me. But no, I know what you mean. I mean, there's absolutely a time to just say, do this. But equally, if you're helping somebody to sort of change how they see whatever endeavor it is, what their thought process is about it, then it's not so much. Then what am I trying to say here? You definitely want them to figure some stuff out on their own, even if the conclusion they come to isn't the one you wanted them to come to. You sort of want them to go away and think and reflect, and you want to give them new information you think they may be missing, and you hope it will make them go in this direction, and perhaps it will, perhaps it won't.
Rather than just sort of reacting to what you say.
Mhm. Yeah.
Think about what you said and then decide whether to accept all of it or some of it or none of it.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean Bruce Hamilton, who I was talking to recently about this, and talked about some piece of advice he'd got, and it sort of popped up again several years later, and it kind of clicked into place in a way that might not even have been what the person originally meant at the time, but it's kind of resurfaced, and he made use of it as it came along. So, yeah.
Rachel, I'm going to stop the recording soon, I think.
Sure.
Anything you'd like to
Yeah.
say before I do that?
No, I think that was
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you
Good
very,
questions.
very much. It's
Good
really good.
discussion afterwards. Yeah.
All right.